Hi, today we're going to talk about the Kriegsmesser. Kriegsmesser, big knife. It's kind of a cool sword. It's a very impressive piece when you look at it. It's even more impressive when you put it in your hand. And it's got a few attributes that are pretty interesting when you start looking at it in the context of how it was used in the period and what these types of weapons were capable of. Today's example is a custom piece we made for a customer. Hopefully they will be very happy with it. And it is for a left-handed person, and I'm right-handed. So a little bit of monkeying around as I do this. I might grab it in a weird way sometimes, but that's the reason. So I'm trying to use it kind of opposite of what I would normally try to do. This particular piece came out almost right exactly at 5 pounds. And that seems pretty heavy for a sword, even a long sword. But when you pick this piece up, even with one hand, it doesn't feel too bad in your hand at all. You could manipulate it and use it in a way that would be pretty effective, even if you were one-handed. What happens with these kinds of swords is, especially with the wider blades and the single-edged, is you have to do a huge amount of dynamic physics of the weapon in the distal taper. So you can see you have a very heavy back edge, but it starts to taper almost instantly. And as it gets closer and closer to the tip, it gets very, very thin, right? You can flex it with your fingertips pretty easily. That is the way these types of swords are made. It allows you to have the structures of the sword and the physics of the sword in your hand work very well when it comes in contact with other swords in a conflict. This particular sword, when you're fighting with it, is very similar to having a long sword. It's got a few advantages in a sense that you can still thrust very effectively with it. You can cut with your long edge, of course. The short edge is obviously not available as a cutting surface, but with the arced blade, with the sabered blade, it allows you, when you get into contact in deaths, in a sense, in the Lichtenauer system, you can, with just a slight turn of the weapon, gain a leverage advantage against your opposing sword. That allows you to really be able to control that center area of the fight that is so important in those styles of combat. It's a very impressive piece. We have a matching red leather scabbard with a simple chape on it, and also illustrates one of the interesting things about Messer scabbards is because of the shape and structure of the blade, the scabbards need to be usually larger than the actual blade to be able to get all of that in there and all the way down. On something like this where it's a relatively consistent width, even though the shape is sabered, it's not too bad. But when you get into some of the bigger blades, and especially falchions and things, some of the scabbards you'll see illustrated in art, per se, will have an open back all the way down, halfway even sometimes, so that the whole sword can get put in the scabbard and structured that way. So we can see with this Kriegsmesser, it's a big sword. It's running 51¼ inches long. Blade length's about 37½ inches. It's got the clipped point, slightly sabered blade. Balance point cog is running about 3.125 inches or so in front of the guard. So it's not a massive, heavy, forward-weighted sword. It's got some beef to it. You can really feel it in your hands, much like you would any sturdy kind of long sword. But again, with the structures of these types of blades, you have that back weighting by putting the distal taper in the sword and the heftiness of the components that you have, the pommel and the crossguard, and it really creates a piece that you can get a tremendous cutting type of action going through. The nagel comes up relatively high, about 2¾ inches. Is got a nice shape. It's kind of got a fullered structure to it. There's a fuller on the edge of the back edge of the blade, running all the way down, almost to the peak there. You have a shaped pommel or butt, and it is peened down and allows for you to really kind of get that little finger caught right in there, and you can really feel the difference, the leverages you get between the space between your two hands when you have the sword out in front of you. The grip is constructed with 2 wooden scales out of a hardwood, and they are stained and then treated with some tung oil because it's got a little bit of a grip to it. The grip structure itself has this groove or fuller, in a sense, running down it, and some people think that'll feel strange, but it actually feels very, very comfortable in the hand. It allows the kind of meat of your upper palm to ride in one side, and then the fingertips curl around, and you can really feel a secure grip on there, and you do not feel like you're going to lose the sword whatsoever. The hands themselves have a good bit of space between them, which gives you excellent leverage. As it manipulates that sword through the actions, you can really feel that you have control of where that active rotational point is. That's the part of the sword where the rest of the sword wants to move around itself in time and space when it's in your hand. And that can be affected by a lot of things, the style of grip you have on it, how many hands you have on it, all those things. So it's a variable spot on a sword in a fight. But this particular sword does feel very controlled in your hands. You have a feeling that you know exactly where it's at and where it's going to go when you initiate an action. This sword is very, very comfortable in the hands. Messers are some of our favorite swords. They really have a utilitarian quality to them, whether that's implied by us as the viewer or not. They're very effective weapons. The systems for using them are quite efficient, and you get a really beautiful sword that moves very well and would be devastating on the battlefields.